This graph shows the latest house price to earnings as a ratio. We're currently past the highest peak seen in recent history, even higher than the late 80s and early 90s, where house prices were 3 times our annual earnings. In 2022, we peaked at 7 times that amount, more than double, and we're now back on our way down. And this graph from Nationwide and the Office for National Statistics, which is always a few months behind on their data, shows the latest stats from Q4 2022, where the current first-time buyer house price to earnings was on average 5.5 times the amount. House prices have been really hot for a long time now, so is it time for a property crash? And what is going to happen? In this video, let's explore house prices, affordability, and the recession to look at the reality of what a house price crash could actually mean. So let's look at affordability. If you're a first-time buyer, you have been totally screwed. I completely get it and understand the problem that you're going through right now. You save up loads of money, you work really hard, even harder than boomers. Don't shoot me for saying that. This graph from Nationwide shows the current amount of years taken to save a 20% deposit on average across the UK. Londoners are about halfway to retirement before they get a deposit, with a staggering 15 years of saving to get a 20% deposit on their housing. Compared to more normal parts of the UK, like the North, where we're seeing an average time to save about 7 years. Can I call the North normal? But even so, 7 years is still a long amount of time because unfortunately houses don't cost £5,000 anymore. So much so, I was watching a renovation video on YouTube where an old newspaper from 1960 showed flats from Tunbridge Wells for £3,850. That's the same wealthy place where Rishi was caught saying that he was going to funnel funds from deprived areas to the very wealthy suburb of Tunbridge Wells. It feels super hard at the moment to buy a house, and the reality is that's because it is. But first, I'd like to thank Blinkist for sponsoring this video. If you're looking to upskill your business and personal finance knowledge, then you can literally read a book in minutes using Blinkist. The Blinkist app allows you to understand the most important things from over 5,500 non-fiction books and podcasts in just 15 minutes. With the help of Blinkist, you can discover new perspectives, broaden your horizons, and have exciting conversations. Being educated and entertained at the same time is why I choose Blinkist over any other product. The Blinkist audio experience is especially top-notch, and it's more than just a book summary. It always gets me thinking deeper about topics, theories, and new ideas. And personally, I love reading the money and investment section, and my way of thinking around personal finance has been changed with books like The 4-Hour Workweek, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and The Compound Effect, and loads more. They also have Blinkist Connect, which allows every Blinkist premium plan to be shared by 2 different accounts with no additional cost. It's a little bit like sharing a Netflix subscription, but it's allowed, so you can share and discover good titles with your friends. For me, in 2023, I want to be more productive and be more efficient in running my business and this channel. I'm learning loads through Blinkist on these topics, and Blinkist have kindly made an offer for you to all get 25% off Blinkist Premium and enjoy 2 memberships for the price of 1. You can start your 7-day free trial by clicking the link in the description box. Let's look at this graph from Nationwide, which compared in grey the first-time buyer mortgage payments as a percentage of take-home pay in 2021 versus 2022, just 1 year apart versus the red dots, which is the long-run average. In London, it shot up from 50% to 65% in 1 year. The West Midlands went from 30 to 40%, and the North from about 20 up to 25%. So everyone's budgets are more stretched than ever before, and when you combine that, plus then things like energy bills, council tax, petrol and fuel, everything is going up in price. It's really hard. It's okay to admit to yourself right now that it's not the time to save or it's a struggle, because that's the reality, and millions of people are in the exact same situation that you are in too. But that being said, if you're watching this video thinking about buying a house and you have savings to pay for a house or some kind of deposit, then actually you're doing better than a lot of people right now, and that's a good thing. When looking at affordability, the pandemic created a really interesting scenario where a lot of us were actually saving more money. People weren't spending money on avocado on toast like us millennials do. We weren't meeting friends, going out, going for day trips. Heck, we weren't even driving to work and spending money on petrol. Thus, everyone had way more money in their bank accounts and savings accounts as a result. Now, I've always had to resort to looking at some of the annual reports of banks like Lloyds Banking Group, where I used to work, to show some of the stats on how deposits, which is the amount of money in your current account and savings account stored with a bank, how it massively increased during the pandemic pandemic. But now the Bank of England have released this graph, which shows during the pandemic a huge increase of flow into household deposits, which is what fueled the whole boom. People had more cash, and damn right, they were using it to change their lives to buy better houses. Then as things settled, we're back at normal levels now on top of the higher interest rates and higher property prices. Everything is taking a bit of a time out on the naughty step. So how does the recession and the property market link together? Well, the property market is very cyclical in nature. It goes around every 18 years, which is known as the 18-year property cycle. Now, this was coined by an economist called Fred Harrison, who looked at the past 200 years worth of property data and found the cycle to happen again and again and again in exactly the same way. We have a recession, and then we go into the recovery phase. After 1 to 7 years of growth, we hit the mid-cycle wobble. After that, everyone realizes that everything is okay, and we enter the explosive phase where everyone goes into hype mode and property prices completely skyrocket until a point you hit the winner's curse, people buy at the top of the market, and then we enter the crash phase, which is where we are today. And with GDP and the recession, the GDP is effectively the value of all of our goods and services created every single quarter, and it's our output as a country. A lot of that has a downward pressure on it at the moment due to the massive energy cost that we're all having to pay. Ultimately, all of this is weighing on household incomes, which is why we're expecting over the next year GDP to be slightly negative or otherwise flat rather than growing. We're effectively slowing down from 4% growth to about 0.5% at the moment. But the real impact is that if household affordability has been impacted here and it's going downwards, that ultimately then impacts the housing market because people can't afford nice luxury houses with really cheap mortgages because interest rates are higher, monthly cash flow is lower, and it becomes this vicious cycle that goes both ways and becomes doubly hard to afford the same house. With inflation peaking at around 11%, we're now starting to see that the worst is over, and inflation is starting to go down as we enter into 2023. This graph from the Bank of England shows the difference that the energy price increases cause to inflation. Potentially, without the issues in Russia and with our gas supplies in Europe, we would have seen an inflation rate still at a reasonable but high rate of 7.8%. With inflation so high, it means that naturally the Bank of England also have to raise the bank rate, which they've risen to try and tackle inflation to bring it back down to their usual target of 2% a year. This graph shows the current causes of the higher inflation, with petrol and energy in the cyan causing the icing on the cake, goods going up in price causing the bulk in the middle, and an increase in services more recently to help counteract having to pay higher wages to pay for the higher cost of living, which is a little bit of a vicious cycle. Interestingly, it might not feel like it, but in this graph, pay growth was shown to be 6.4% higher in the 3 months to November 2022, specifically in the private sector, where growth was 7.2%. The problem is with higher wages, it means that they need to be funded somehow or some way. And now that we're seeing the cost of goods start to go down, we're still seeing services like paying for your plumber and solicitor or going to the dentist. All of this is massively increasing to pay for the increase in people's wages, to then pay for the extreme cost of living crisis. And unfortunately, if we're all paying for the cost of living crisis because of inflation, which is causing services to go up, that's still keeping inflation up as well. So it's this entire vicious cycle. Something has to give in this circle that just keeps going round and round and round. And until that happens, the bank rate is still going to remain high, which ultimately impacts our mortgage rates. So are we looking at a recession as bad as 2008? In short, no. 2008 was a very different and extreme set of circumstances never really seen before. It all started from lots of subprime mortgages being sold to customers in the US who simply could not afford them if the rates increased. And when the rates did go up, a lot of people started defaulting on their mortgages and ultimately led to a lot of repossessions. That's very different to today, where the FCA and the UK banks are very, very stringent and put in a lot of affordability stress tests on people before they take out their mortgages, so that when rates go up like they have done recently, a lot of people can weather them a lot better. When comparing the differences in GDP of the different recessions over the past 40 years, this graph from the Bank of England shows that from the pre-recession peak, 2023 is projected on the purple line to be quite shallow and not last for very long. Compared to 1990 in the orange and the deeper cyan 1980 line, and the even deeper and longer 2008 gold/yellow line. And when you translate a recession into house prices and how it impacts the cost of a property, this graph shows house prices back in 2007 and 8. House prices went from a peak of about £185,000 down to £145,000, which is a 21% drop, which is bad. And that would have definitely impacted those who had loan-to-value mortgages anything greater than 80%. But it's not some extreme, huge market correction that a lot of newspapers have been talking about in 2023. So when you look at the size of the recession of 2008 versus the projections for 2023, a 10% house drop seems quite reasonable compared to the 20% drop back in 2008. If anything, 10% actually sounds like a little bit too much. When you factor in that GDP was 6 times worse in its decline in 2008 compared to the expectations and forecasts of this year. So what will happen in 2023? Well, we're already starting to see the beginning of the decline. House prices have been surging for a very long time, and it is time for them to cool off a little bit now. At the start of 2023, Nationwide is showing that we're about 1% above where we were this time last year. So we're still a little bit warm, but I think the next month's data we'll start to see prices are going to start going down and we'll start seeing negative year-on-year house price decreases. The latest monthly change from Nationwide saw a 0.9% drop between December 2022 and January 2023, and the annual changes dropping from 2.8% year-on-year in December to just 1.1% year-on-year in January. This isn't just happening in the UK though, we're seeing this all over Europe. The Financial Times did an article about how Eurozone demand for mortgages has massively decreased, just like we've seen in the UK as well. This is a good thing because when there's less demand, it means that banks become more competitive and start to lower their rates so that they can attract more buyers back into the market. This graph from the FT shows the 80% reduction in mortgage demand in Europe, which closely matches the data that the Bank of England published at the start of 2023 about UK mortgages showing similar figures, where we saw a drop of 80% in the net balances being lent out for houses and property in the UK. And I think because of this massive drop in demand, the banks are going to continue to be competitive, and I think seeing 4% interest rates this year, or something a little below 4%, might be somewhat realistic. This would help a lot in the south, home counties and London, where house prices are typically higher, who have seen in the darker red areas the highest rises in yearly mortgage costs. So the 2023 outlook. I do strongly believe that we've seen the worst of the inflation now, and it is on its way down. So far, the Bank of England forecasts have been reasonably accurate and true. That means that we should see inflation drop as sharply as it rose this year, and we could be down by the end of the year, which is a good thing. Ultimately, this brings the mortgage rates down, which will then spark more activity back in the property market again and stop a crash being too deep for too long. Right now, we're already benefiting from banks competing against each other due to the low demand in the market. So if you combine this, then with the lower inflation and lowering bank rates in the future, this should be a really positive double whammy for buyers in the market, which will then start to see prices stabilize and also mortgages be a little bit more affordable than what they are today. Prices might still go down 10%, and that's absolutely fine. We're already starting that journey right now. But when property prices have been so high for so long and have been touching around 12% growth year on year, it is time for things to cool down. And if you're buying a house for the long term anyway, then a short 5 to 7 or 8% drop from today isn't the worst thing in the world. So should you buy a house now or wait? Well, there is some merit in waiting just a few more months to see the property prices continue to go down a few percentage points. But at the same time, if you understand the difference between an asking price and an actual sold price, as in the prices that you see on Zoopla and Rightmove is not the value of the house, that's the asking price that the estate agent and the seller want. It doesn't mean it has to sell for that price. Often enough, sellers and estate agents, of course, want the highest price possible. And in markets like these, it's pretty common to put in below asking price offers, but that doesn't necessarily mean that if you go below the asking price that it's actually below the value of the property itself. For example, I could put a house that's worth £250,000 on the market and have an asking price of £260,000. If you offered me 250, you're thinking that you've got £10,000 off the price of the property, when in fact all you're doing is paying the 250k that it's actually worth. So actually, don't be afraid to put in an offer of 240, 245 or something below what is based on the sold comparables in the area, which is very easy to check on Rightmove. Ignore the asking prices, look at the actual sold prices on the street and in the area. The heat of the property market has definitely gone now, and it means that it's a buyer's market rather than a seller's market. So so you have the luxury of getting a really good house at a potentially really good price. I definitely think the worst is over now, and that means that for those who missed the original prices a few months ago or a year ago, there will be a second chance at those slightly lower rates. It will never be as low as what it used to be back in the olden days, but it means that there's a slight cooling now and you've got a bit of a chance to go again before they take the next ride up in the property market. If you enjoyed this video, then you can check out this one here, which explores the 18-year property cycle in more details and looks at how the current recession is impacting the 18-year property cycle. So click on the video here and check it out. Thanks to Blinkist for sponsoring this video. Check the link below to subscribe.